Amphibious warfare is a type of offensive military operation that today uses naval ships to project ground and air power onto a hostile or potentially hostile shore at a designated landing beach. Through history, the operations were conducted using ships' boats as the primary method of delivering troops to shore. Since the Gallipoli Campaign, specialized watercraft were increasingly designed for landing troops, materiel and vehicles, including by landing craft, and for insertion of commandos by fast patrol boats, zodiacs, and from mini-submersibles. The term amphibious first emerged in the USA during the 1930s after design of the landing vehicle track, where the first prototypes were named Alligator and Crocodile, though neither species are amphibian. Amphibious warfare includes operations defined by the type, purpose, scale and means of execution. In the British Empire at the time, these were called combined operations, which were defined as operations where naval, military or air forces in any combination are cooperating with each other, working independently under the respective commanders but with a common strategic object. All armed forces that employ troops with special training and equipment for conducting landings from naval vessels to shore agree to this definition. Since the 20th century, an amphibious landing of troops on a beachhead is acknowledged as the most complex of all military maneuvers. The undertaking requires an intricate coordination of numerous military specialties, including air power, naval gunfire, naval transport, logistical planning, specialized equipment, land warfare, tactics, and extensive training in the nuances of this maneuver for all personnel involved. Amphibious operation. An amphibious operation is both similar and different in many ways to both land, naval and air operations. At its basic, such operations include phases of strategic planning and preparation, operational transit to the intended theater of operations, pre-landing rehearsal and disembarkation, troop landings, beachhead consolidation and conducting inland, ground and air operations. Historically, within the scope of these phases, a vital part of success was often based on the military logistics, naval gunfire and close air support. Another factor is the variety and quantity of specialized vehicles and equipment used by the landing force that are designed from the specific needs of this type of operation. Amphibious operations can be classified as tactical or operational raids, such as the JEP raid, operational landings in support of a larger land strategy such as the Kerch-Eltigen operation, and a strategic opening of a new theater of operations, for example the Operation Avalanche. The purpose of amphibious operations is always offensive, but limited by the plan and terrain. Landings on islands less than 5,000 square kilometers in size are tactical, usually with the limited objectives of neutralizing enemy defenders and obtaining a new base of operation. Such an operation may be prepared and planned in days or weeks, and would employ a naval task force to land less than a division of troops. The intent of operational landings is usually to exploit the shore as a vulnerability in the enemy's overall position, forcing redeployment of forces, premature use of reserves, and aiding a larger Allied offensive effort elsewhere. Such an operation, requiring weeks to months of preparation and planning, would use multiple task forces, or even a naval fleet to land corps-size forces, including on large islands, for example Operation Chromite. A strategic landing operation requires a major commitment of forces to invade a national territory in the archipelagic, such as the Battle of Leyte, or continental, such as Operation Neptune. Such an operation may require multiple naval and air fleets to support the landings, and extensive intelligence gathering and planning of over a year. Although most amphibious operations are thought of primarily as beach landings, they can exploit available shore infrastructure to land troops directly into an urban environment if unopposed. In this case, non-specialized ships can offload troops, vehicles and cargo using organic or facility wharf-side equipment. Tactical landings in the past have utilized small boats, small craft, small ships and civilian vessels converted for the mission to deliver troops to the water's edge. Preparation and planning. Preparation and planning. The naval landing operation requires the assembly of vessels with sufficient capacity to lift necessary troops, employing combat loading. The military intelligence services produce a briefing on the expected opponent which guides the organization and equipping of the embarked force. First, specially designed landing craft were used for the Gallipoli landings, and armored tracked vehicles were also available for the Gallipoli Campaign. Helicopters were first used to support beach landings during Operation Musketeer. Hovercraft have been in use for naval landings by military forces since the 1960s. Origins. Recorded amphibious warfare goes back to ancient times. The Sea Peoples menaced the Egyptians from the reign of Akhenaten as captured on the reliefs at Medinet Habu and Karnak. The Hellenic city-states routinely resorted to opposed assaults upon each other's shores, which they reflected upon in the plays and other expressions of art. The landing at Marathon by the ancient Persians on the 9th of September 490 BC was the largest amphibious operation for 2,400 years until eclipsed by the landings at Gallipoli. Marines. In 1565, the island of Malta was invaded by the Ottoman Turks during the Great Siege of Malta, forcing its defenders to retreat to the fortified cities, a strategic choke point in the Mediterranean Sea. Its loss would have been so menacing for the Western European kingdoms that forces were urgently raised in order to relieve the island. But it took 4 months to train, arm, and move a 5,500-man amphibious force to lift the siege. Then, Philip II, King of Spain, decided to train and assign amphibious assault-skilled units to the Royal Armada. These units were trained specifically for fighting on and from ships. The Spanish Marines were born. The idea was to set up a permanent assignation of land troops to the Royal Spanish Navy, available for the Crown. Thus other countries adopted the idea and subsequently raised their own early marine forces as well. The first professional marine units were already task-trained amphibious troops, but instead of being disbanded, were kept for the Spanish Crown's needs. The first actions took place all along the Mediterranean Sea, where the Turks and pirate settlements were a risk for commerce and navigation. Algiers, Malta, Gulfs. The Terceras landing in the Azores Islands on the 25th of May 1583 was a military feat, as its planners decided to make a fake landing to distract the defending forces. Also, special seagoing barges were arranged in order to unload cavalry horses and 700 artillery pieces on the beach. Special rowing boats were armed with small cannons to support the landing. Boats, special supplies were ready to be unloaded and support the 11,000-man landing force strength. The total strength of the amphibious force was 15,000 men, including an armada of 90 ships. Development. During this period, European countries were expanding and creating colonies. Amphibious operations were mostly oriented to settle colonies and strong points along the navigational routes. Amphibious forces were fully organized and devoted to this mission, although the troops not only fought ashore, but on board ships. By their nature, amphibious assaults are highly complex operations involving the coordination of disparate disparate elements and therefore prone to disastrous results if not properly planned. One of the most spectacular instances of such a failure occurred in 1741 at the Battle of Cartagena de Indias, when a large British amphibious assault force with a divided command was defeated by a much smaller but heavily fortified Spanish defense. 20 years later, in 1762, a similar British force successfully landed at Havana, besieged the city and captured it after a 2-month campaign thanks to improved coordination of land and sea forces. A major amphibious landing took place during the Siege of Quebec in 1759 as part of the 7 Years' War. The first specially designed landing craft were produced to enable the British troops to cross the St. Lawrence River in force. After considering and rejecting a number of plans for landings on the north shore of the river, a decision was made in late August by General James Wolfe and his brigadiers to land upriver of the city. The British prepared for the risky deployment upstream. Troops had already been aboard landing ships and drifting up and down the river for several days when Wolfe, on the 12th of September, made a final decision on the British landing site, selecting Lanzo-Fowlin. Wolfe's plan of attack depended on secrecy and surprise, a key element of a successful amphibious operation. A small party of men would land by night on the north shore, climb the tall cliff, seize a small road, and overpower the garrison that protected it, allowing the bulk of his army to ascend the cliff by the small road and then deploy for battle on the plateau. The operation was a success, leading to the surrender of the city, and heavily influenced subsequent engagements. In 1762, Royal Navy sailors and Marines succeed in taking the capitals of the Spanish Western East Indies, Havana in Cuba, and Manila by sea, respectively. In 1776, Samuel Nicholas and the Continental Marines, the progenitor of the United States Marine Corps, made a first successful landing in the Battle of Nassau. In 1782, a long Franco-Spanish attempt to seize Gibraltar by waterborne forces was rebuffed. In 1783, a Franco-Spanish force invaded the island of Minorca. In 1793, Minorca experienced yet another of its many changes of sovereignty when captured by a British landing. Industrial era. During the Crimean War, an Anglo-French amphibious operation was launched against Russia at Bomisund, Finland on 8 August 1854. During the American Civil War, the United States made several amphibious assaults all along the Confederate States coastline. Hatteras Inlet and Port Royal, South Carolina were the first of many attacks, along with others on Roanoke Island, NC, Galveston, TX, Fort Sumter, Morris Island and James Island, SC, and several more. The largest was at the Fort Fisher, which was the largest and most powerful fort in the world at the time, protecting the entrance of Wilmington, North Carolina. The assaulting force consisted of over 15,000 men and 70 warships with over 600 guns. An early form of amphibious warfare was employed during the War of the Pacific in 1879, and saw coordination of Army, Navy and specialized units. The first amphibious assault of this war took place as 2,100 Chilean troops successfully took Pisagua from 1,200 Peruvian and Bolivian defenders on the 2nd of November 1879. Chilean Navy ships bombarded beach defenses for several hours at dawn, followed by open or oared boats landing Army infantry and sapper units into waist-deep water under enemy fire. An outnumbered first landing wave fought at the beach. The second and third waves in the following hours were able to overcome resistance and move inland. By the end of the day, an expeditionary army of 10,000 had disembarked at the captured port. In 1881, Chilean ships transported approximately 30,000 men, along with their mounts and equipment, 500 miles in order to attack Lima. Chilean commanders were using purpose-built, flat-bottomed landing craft that would deliver troops in shallow water closer to the beach, possibly the first purpose-built amphibious landing craft in history. These boats would be able to land 3,000 men and 12 guns in a single wave. Landing tactics and operations were closely observed by neutral parties during the war. Two Royal Navy ships monitored the Battle of Pisagua. United States Navy observer Lt. Theodorus B. M. Mason included an account on his report The War on the Pacific Coast of South America. The USWAT with Alfred Thayer Mahon in command was stationed at Callao, Peru, protecting American interests during the final stages of the War of the Pacific. He formulated his concept of sea power while reading a history book in an English gentleman's club in Lima, Peru. This concept became the foundation for his celebrated The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. An amphibious assault took place at the beaches of Veracruz, Mexico in 1914, when the United States Navy attacked and occupied the city as a result of the Tampico affair.